Good morning, good evening, good day, greetings with a helping side of salutations. With also welcome, right? We just throw it on top like the pickles on a hamburger. But thank you for joining us to the Safe Room featuring security side quests. My name is Tristan Watty, and I am joined by the mysterious, the marvelous, the Mister himself, Russ. How's it going, Russ?
Hey, how's it going, Tristan? How you doing this fine Monday afternoon?
I would say it's Monday, so peachy keen. I think that's the word of the day I'm going, but it's 2026 too. And I'm going to throw in one last Happy New Year in there, just in case you weren't here. I know I threw in like 20 last week, but
everyone's getting back to work now and stuff. Holidays are like officially over, so we can probably repeat a little bit of things from last week. It is what it is.
Yeah, and PTO ran out. People had to come back. Those kind of things. But for those who are joining us, thank you. So if you're joining us for the first time, I would say welcome. But also, you need to know the rundown of how we go about this show. And we always start with a reintroduction. Be warned. Exactly. We reintroduce ourselves the proper way. So I am Tristan Watty. I'm a senior security consultant coming to you from the professional services division of AWS, where we help to accelerate customers' journeys to the cloud in a secure manner, fashion, form, way. And I am joined by Russ.
Yes, I am here from the Security Incident Response Engineering team for the Security Incident Response Service. Bit of a mouthful, but it is what it is. I'm not in charge of naming. Where we help you contain and mitigate AWS-related incidents.
Yes.
So
we need a shirt with all of that on it, Russ.
Yeah, I need something, like maybe a little business card with that whole blurb on it. Just like, this is me and this is what I do.
Just flip it around and you're just like, no, everything.
All of it. It's double-sided, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
The rest of it's on the back.
But thank you for joining us one last time. We say it 3 times for the other people on the other side of the internet. So if you heard that, feel free to also let us know where you're tuning in from, where you're listening from, or where you're just having a fun time from. And as always, we always come with 2 questions, because good things come in 2s and great things come in 4s. But since we don't have 4 things, we're going to go with the second question. And Russ, I will pose this one to you. Would you rather have a mini-map that shows all bugs in your code base, or a compass that points towards the root cause of any issue?
I'm going to go with the mini-map, and it's not related to the bugs in my code base or the root cause of any issue. It's just because of me as a person. I think I would be able to more easily navigate a mini-map than a compass. Not in real life. I think a compass on a map makes sense. A compass in a code base sounds terrible. So I'm going to go with the mini-map for that reason alone.
So we need some graphics on that of what a compass in a code base would look like, first of all.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because I just figure like just something gets projected in front of your eyes and you're just like, oh, it just keeps pointing up.
Oh,
up.
Okay.
Yeah. Right?
Now, if it's an up or down compass, hell yeah.
Yeah. It's like, keep going up. When you get to the enterprise level,
Colder,
you're like, no, keep going.
Colder.
Keep going. Yeah. So with me, I think I would go, mini-map. I have to go with the mini-map just because mini-maps are cool, right? Just as cool as having the map of security best practices. As we nail the transition in 2026, this goes, right? We learned everything from our previous episode, which was what, Russ?
Yes, our previously seen on the Safe Room featuring Security Side Quest. Last week's episode was our first of 2026, and we decided to go with Control Tower. So our last episode was World 1-1. The security legend begins. Control Tower ready. And this week we're going to bump it up to World 1-2. Power up collected. Landing Zone Accelerator activated.
Yes. And just, I feel the enthusiasm activated as well, because we're slowly making the progress, right? We're collecting power-ups. We're going along the way, making security is at the forefront and the top priority. So let's talk about World 1-2. You might have thought of like, hey, I nailed everything in Control Tower, but what's the Landing Zone Accelerator now, right? Well, that's kind of where we're going to go today. We're going to speak about how the LZA enhances Control Tower, right? Because what you really need to do is understand kind of what the foundations of what Control Tower sets up within your environment and why LZA is kind of a natural evolution for a lot of organizations that look to say like, hey, what's our next step? We talk about security roadmaps and security target state strategies, things of that nature. But what happens when you have certain compliance frameworks, PCI, NIST, so on and so forth, right? HIPAA. You want to have different mechanisms in place so that you can continuously evolve your baseline. And part of that evolution is your understanding. So that's kind of where we're going to go today, along with diving deep, as we like to do, and figuring out how we can customize said LZA once we figure out what it is, right? What do we need to know in terms of different file structures? What's the security-config YAML? What is a global config file? So on and so forth. And after that, we kind of get down to the networking. Everybody's favorite topic, right? I know Russ goes crazy for it, right? Advanced networking, right? You just talk about it all the time. And then after that, we'll just talk about how our organization-wide security services strategies can be a little bit upgraded, right? We'll just speak about some services you might want to consider, you might want to have, you might want to implement. Not for us, but for
well, it is for me. It helps you stay away from me and my team. So yeah, this directly helps me.
Yeah, it's like, no, this I directly profit from this. Yes, but I think we like to have fun here on the show if this is your first time, because the topic of security is a fun topic because you get to dive in and understand all these different pieces of the puzzle. But usually before we dive in, we have kind of a poll, right? And that poll helps us to kind of shake the cobwebs off and kind of move towards understanding. And part of that understanding is like, hey, what's draining your health bar the most? When you're thinking of your security posture, of your target state security strategy, your day-to-day, your tickets, what comes to mind? Russ, what have you seen?
Man, can I say all of the above? I mean, this is definitely, you've picked really good draining ones. But what I've seen versus what I feel, I've definitely seen deploying security services to each account manually, and that is a big hiccup, in incident response. Trying to enable maybe a mitigation or a containment action manually across dozens or hundreds of accounts manually, not fun at all. So I don't recommend that. That's probably in my opinion the most draining, but I definitely see all of the other answers as well. For sure. Actually, you know what? As I look at this, I think I might switch to number 2, managing network connectivity between accounts. Because I do see that also very regularly, just like not necessarily understanding how, your internet gateway works and how you can, kind of silo those public versus private VPCs, and sometimes I do see a lot of that, especially when we're dealing with like network type of attacks, and people are like, well, how did they get through my all of these different network security tooling? And I'm like, well, it's because you have it configured that way, that it is allowable to do. So this is definitely one that I see regularly as well. I think it would be between 1 and 2. But that's also not personal, but the bias in my role. I don't really deal with nearly as many compliance issues, so I don't really see as much of those. But I do know that is definitely something that organizations have trouble with, and drains out their security team. So
yeah, definitely. And I saw your health bar draining as you were speaking about it's an interesting topic. And I forgot to mention, put 1, 2, 3, or 4 in the chat for you to kind of participate with us. I would say it's interesting because when you come at it from that perspective, I see a lot of the 3 aspect, but it's almost the theoretical auditors that are coming. It's like winter is coming, right? It's like, hey, the auditors are coming. How do we know we're doing this? And usually the customers, what we see is them starting to have the conversations internally and with us as AWS professional services, like, hey, how do I prepare for this audit, right? We are going to start the audit cycle in 6 months, 9 months, or whatever the case might be. We're migrating our platform. We have to prepare. So how do we prepare? That is the question that we usually get, right? And it usually dives in from there, right? When you're starting to figure out, okay, what standard are you moving towards? What is your North Star? And we usually talk about, okay, it's PCI or PII sensitive data that we're trying to protect, or PHI, or some of the other standards out there, right? And that starts to have you take that step back and think about your environment in a different way, because as you're starting to think about that, you start to think about, how do I know I'm heading in the right direction, right? And it's usually overwhelming at first, especially for newer customers to the AWS cloud, is, hey, we're used to doing it this way on-prem. And now that we're migrating 1 application, 5 applications, 10 applications, and then we're going to have customers coming into it, how do we kind of move towards ensuring that we feel comfortable, right? Do I feel comfortable with my security strategy? And that's kind of where we get from 1-1 to 1-2, is we lay down the foundation. We set up our accounts. We put into place some of the services like Security Hub and things of that nature. But how do we further take it one step beyond? If you get that reference, 10 billion points to you, because that's where we start to think about Landing Zone Accelerator and how LZA can enhance overall, because it has some built-in frameworks that you can move towards, right? NIST, PCI, so on and so forth, right? And it can help shape your network architecture. It can help shape kind of the complex needs, because there's a lot of different, let's say, applications out there. And with that application, there's usually different requirements, different levels of access, and then different conversations that are had. And now what you have is an ability to customize your environment a little bit further, right? Because LZA unlocks that IAC power up, right? I know a lot of organizations, as they start to dabble in it, they kind of do a mix of, okay, we're just going to do some click ops here, and then we'll do some code here, right? Usually it's a mix depending on who's actually working on it. So the part that LZA helps to structure, it helps you to take a infrastructure as code management approach first, where your entire landing zone config lives in a version control YAML, right? And that's where you hear all the applause and cheering, like, what? Version control? Can I find more of that, sir? Yes, right? Because as we're moving towards the auditors that we were just speaking about, right? Is how do you know that who's making control changes, who's doing what within your environment? That's one step along the way. And then being able to have that live in different config files that customize your different resources is an important concept, right? Mm-hmm. So if you think about that and take it to the next level, that's kind of you start to think, okay, when do I implement this? Because now I'm talking about customizations. And Russ, I don't know, from your end, how do you see this play out, right, with a customer? If they have like a control tower and then maybe a landing zone setup, do you see they tend to over customize or under customize based on having something?
I mean, based on what I'm seeing, under customize. Just basically, loading up the template, using the pre-configured options, and then just kind of leaving it there. And I think that comes mostly from a little bit of a misunderstanding of what landing zone and control tower are doing. I think maybe there was a misunderstanding about whether or not it's a managed service and some things like that. And so I just want to state that the landing zone is just that. It's a landing zone. It's a starting point where you launch off of. So you don't want to just leave it at the base configuration. We leave the base configurations fairly easily to customize, but at a base level. So you really don't want to be just at that base level. It's easier, with these pre-configured to make it your own, but it's definitely not designed to just work right out of the box. I mean, it is, but it's also like you need to still take that iterative approach and continue to make it work for your environment, especially when we're talking about these highly regulated markets. That's a way to get you at a good baseline for those regulated markets, but then you need to take the next step, which is why we're now on World 1-2, to get you to that level where, you're making those customizations, editing the config files for your environment, using what maybe you've learned in your last auditing session to, improve things as you go forward. So definitely not a just deploy and hands off type of situation. Which I think is more what I've seen is that little bit of confusion. So I did want to take a second to call that out real quick.
Yeah, and you're definitely right. Is just understanding the difference between the two is important. And since this is this show, video game analogy, right? So if you think of Control Tower, think of Control Tower like a character select of a pre-made class, right? You have your warrior, your mage, your rogue with the preset stats and abilities, right? You click, you're done, you're playing. But if you want to go a little bit more into detailed, right? That's where the LZA standpoint comes in, where maybe you create the base class and then you have every stat slider that you can move up and down and choose individual perks because, hey, I'm a base mage, so I can have these couple of abilities too, right?
Yep.
That's kind of where you see the difference between the two, and understanding how they work fundamentally is important, especially when you're starting to design your architecture a certain way, right? Because with your architecture, what you can start to think about is, okay, I have Control Tower. That means I have the foundation. It's not something that I have to completely redo, right? It's something that I can add on. So you can start to see how the LZA deployment architecture can fit on top of Control Tower while leveraging things like code pipeline, code build, code command, all these different items in order to deploy additional resources to enable governance within your environment. And that's kind of where we're moving towards, right? Is how do we automate the governance where you have these different guardrails and mechanisms set up for your wide enterprise environment, your accounts, your tools, your logging, all these different components, right? How do I best set that up within my environment, right? So, Russ, when you come to customizing the LZA, what are some of the things that you have to understand when it comes to the customization side of the house?
Yeah, so when you're customizing your LZA, this is a configuration-driven approach. You're really going to focus in on those. Those config. Talking about AWS config. There's additional functionality on top of just the LZA. So when you're adding things like AWS config managed rules and security hub and network topology. Whether you're using VPC or maybe transit gateway, whatever, it is a configuration focused approach. So, LZA uses YAML, which I think most config files do, but it is organized by the major concerns or topics, I guess. So, you have like your global configuration, your security configuration, your network configuration, your IAM configuration, which is super important. And so these sorts of things, allow you to, have that recommended start point, with within your accounts, your structure, and the configurations. So it's, well, first off, a landing zone. And so, just trying to ensure that those configurations are, work well within your environment and are, at least the recommended starting point for those usually highly regulated markets, but for any sort of infrastructure or new architecture. So there are those concerns. So you do have to select the right architecture. So I know that there's CMMC, PCI DSS, NIST. I think we have a bunch of the other I can't think
frameworks.
Framework. Yeah. That's the word I was looking
Yeah.
for. Yeah. See, this is why we got to do this show as a group, together. But yeah, so those frameworks are also available, and then a custom build. So generally speaking, a custom build is not necessarily what you want if you're looking to have that assistance with creating that baseline, especially in like a regulated market. Custom builds are probably more for customers that have well-defined service configurations that they're looking to implement just at scale. So selecting the right infrastructure is important. Customizing and configuring those YAML files. So for your network config, your security config, and your global config, those are your primary files that you'll use to, define your structure and your design, and the account settings. So, that's something that needs to not just be done in the beginning, but also, customizing those iteratively, depending on whatever your risk tolerance is for that sort of thing, whether it's every month or every quarter, whatever. But that's definitely something that you should move into as a workflow. And then there's, of course, ensuring that your Git workflows and any sort of version control or whatever solution you're using for that, for managing your configurations. So that's going to be super important. It's going to be within a Git repository. So you definitely want to take the appropriate, not just for setup, but also for securing that pipeline as well. And then, also for things like, testing changes, pull requests, peer review, all those things that you do within the Git workflow. Definitely want to have those ideally ahead of time. And then your deployment pipeline. So how you actually commit those configuration changes. So generally, I believe that's a CDK deployment, which is just going to read those config files and generate the CloudFormation templates. And so definitely having those, that deployment pipeline, keep that into consideration, how that's going to happen, because that's it, right? Those CloudFormation templates are it. So you just definitely want to make sure that has some sort of, it has the ability to actually, provision those resources across accounts, but also that there are some checks in there to be able to, take what steps need to be taken manually if something goes wrong or something unexpected happens. So yeah, there's a bunch of different things that you need to kind of take into consideration, but realistically, the big thing is really getting those config files, those YAML configurations, for your global security network, IAM, stuff like that. Yeah. So at just like the base level, those are the things that you need to at least, customize and ensure that they fit for your use case or your environment or whatever it may be.
Yeah. And I think you hit on some major points in just terms of understanding the different files that go into LZA, right? When you think of the global config YAML, it's exactly what it is. It's, if this was a video game, it's the world settings, right? What is your login configuration? What is your backup policy? What is your session manager settings, right? It's those little tick marks, right? So when you get into the other ones, you see the same separation of concerns, right? Security is, what is the rules of engagement, right? When it comes to leveraging security, config rules and things of that nature. And then networking is overall the map layout, right? What is the routes that we take? Which ones should we travel, right? Those kind of things. I always bring things back to video game analogies because I think it a little bit helps out. But
it does.
It's a fun aspect, right? We gamify it, right? And I'll see myself out. But when you start to think about how everything is connected, you start to see how things like version control are very well put together within an organization's overall maturity, right? And what I mean by that is, as you start to grow as an enterprise, you start to have to make certain customizations to fit your current maturity level. And having the separation concerns really helps, right? When you think of, okay, I need to make this specific change. Okay, I have SCPs. How do I deploy the SCPs? And you can start to level and kind of apply them in certain ways that just fit your overall structure. And you start to see how the codification comes into place, right? And having a deployment pipeline structure and ability to say, we're going to make this change, and it feeds into the larger pipeline. Right? That's the beauty of IAC, is being able to leverage that. And I think it also just stems back to understanding the fundamentals of what, one, you're responsible for as a customer of AWS. That's, the in the cloud, of the cloud, that kind of conversation. But it also helps you to understand how the different services can be leveraged within your environment. Because when you're looking at things holistically, it's a lot easier to kind of pick, do I need this service active right now? What is its function in here? When you're reading through the code and you just see, okay, Macy is enabled. What does Macy do? I have to set some of the configurations for Macy. Now I have a better understanding of it, opposed to kind of checking a box, right? When you go through the GUI side. That's my own kind of IAC kind of bias, but it just helps you to understand a little bit more, because you have to enable all these default settings. And then the other side of it, to what you were saying, Russ, is there's a lot of different templates that you can apply into LZA. Because it's a YAML file, you can take the work that has been done before, right? It's dangerous to go alone, so take this. Right? You need to follow this specific guideline for, let's say, how to build a secure landing zone in Canada. All right, here's a template of how to do this specifically in Canada that fits that standard. So all these things are important to understand, as well as just hearing about all the different legends that came about, right? Is like, how did we get to this architectural design? Well, that's an interesting point, which we'll delve into in our section. A side quest legend has it. So I'm going to work on that. But we'll cue the music as we begin. For you first time joining us, this section is where we dive into the customer story a little bit deeper. And how do we do that? Well, we bring our old faithful side quest board, which is a visualization of our customer journey. So as always, we have a simplified, let's say, approach right here, right? So if we recall back in World Dash 1, we were building within, let's say, a healthcare organization. And within that healthcare organization, I think we call it Health Sync Alliance or something along those lines. So as they built out Control Tower, they did exactly that. They built out Control Tower, and that was it. Now they're faced with, wait, how do we do the multi-account governance piece? How do we unify our platform a little bit more? We have the control from the tower, but how do we continue to enhance and refine this? The security team is still manually deploying, let's say, guard duty to each new account. The network team is struggling with VPC pairing meshes. And maybe just regular stakeholders and developers are saying, hey, can I use this within the environment? And usually the can I use this comes after I already used it, right? If Russ has any experience in that. But when you start to think of this environment, you kind of think they need a couple of more power-ups, a couple of more story points to kind of delve into. So let's start our journey. As always, we have our unsecured users and we have our authenticated users, and we are trying to build out the path, right? I would say the path to security. I can come up with a catchy phrase there, but hey, everybody has one. So if we're
path to protection,
the path of protection, I will take that, because when you hit the limits of your vanilla control tower environment, Russ, and feel free, anybody in the comments, to also answer, is what are some of the examples of how you hit those limits, right? What is something that you're doing over and over, or that can be done over and over, that can maybe be simplified a little bit based on our story?
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to my answer from the poll question earlier, which is what is draining your health bar? Go ahead and say deploying security services to each account instead of manually, automatically.
Yes, automatically. And
security. No, automagically.
Automagically,
of course.
Yes. See, I had to wait for my ears to clear because there's music to it. But I think the first part we start off with as well is, how do we do that? Well, we start to think about the identity perspective of how can we automatically and securely deploy these different mechanisms, right? So as we take that pause to think about, hey, we have some identity aspects. Maybe you start to think of, hey, can I just throw some lambdas down, face up, and kind of achieve that? Well, maybe, right? But what are those lambdas going to do within your environment? Because sometimes you might have the right tool, but for the wrong job. So I don't think the lambdas would help. It would help in some aspects. But on the front end, I think it boils down to the next question of understanding what the challenge is. So before you start to deploy all of these different services, we have to focus on some of the key concepts from organization. And think of it, they have networking, and maybe they have 47 to 50 hospital accounts, right? With multiple VPC pairing connections, maybe over 200. And they have security services turned on because they, hey, let's turn it on. Guard duty, security hub, config. I'm just turning it on because one account, all right, I just press manually the on button. And maybe they don't have centralized network egress or inspections for traffic, or that magic word of what do the auditors need to know? What do we need to show them? What do we need to meet our HIPAA compliance strategy with? And that's kind of that manual collection aspect. And then you start to come up with, okay, can the control tower guardrails we have in place meet those aspects? Well, you start to figure out is, okay, I can enable, I don't know, guard duty and security hub in all these different accounts. But the real pain point is just understanding how they fit together. And that's where you start to think about, is this, do I need an LZA moment, right? It's that click of, I heard about this, I want to implement this, but should I implement this? Russ, when do you start to have that should I deploy LZA kind of moment?
So there's a couple points. I think the second you said 47 accounts was it right there for me. But like you said, if there's auditing concerns, the network complexity is getting to be too big. compliance frameworks that, you're struggling to meet, a bunch of different reasons that you might want to, hop over to that. But I think as soon as multiple hospitals with over 40 accounts, I think about that pretty much right away.
Yes. And I tend to come from the aspect of the auditors, because it gets brought up on a lot of my side, I should say, right? Because the auditors also ask, hey, do we have any config as code evidence? That is an interesting question. Do we? And that's usually the question that gets posed to us. And we say, hey, you have something that we built as a solution called the LZA, right? And that's your power up. That's when it activates. That's where you hear the little fast. When you start to hear that, you start to think about, hey, we have something that enhanced our governance strategy. We have something that brought together and inspired how all these different pieces of the puzzle not only connect, but are optimized. Because now when you think of guard duty, when you think of security hub, you start to think of all these different pieces of the puzzle acting a little bit more efficiently when it comes to your AWS resources and your environment. Because now you have IAC code that is controlled, because we have identity. We have different versions, right? Important versions. I say it 3 times, versions, for the people on the other side of the interwebs, because it's something important to us. Because it also comes with centralized architectures and all the other stuff. But I say it again, versions, because rollback is a thing. And also, just being able to prove this is how we control the environment. We're controlling every change. When you manually implement items, it's hard to trace back some of what was done, right? So that's why we lean towards the IAC side of the house and start to move towards security automation, because with our approach now, using the LZA, we can have auto deployment, security hub, auto deployed, guard duty, auto deployed, organization wild, config, multi-account, all those good things. But it also leads us to think about it a little bit more. If we have all this enabled, are we doing it the correct way? Is our networking up to date? Is our identity up to date? And that's kind of where we hit that pause game, or Zach Moore's timeout, as I mentioned it. You stop and think about this a little bit more and take a step back, right? That's too far. A little closer, right? As we start to think about what are the next steps, right? And that's kind of where the music cuts off. A different one comes on, because you start to have that deep contemplation of, did I do the right thing? What were we building towards, and did we achieve our goals? Well, let's stop that right now and put on a little bit of a smile, like Russ likes to do, as we start to think about things like centralized networking architectures. Right? Russ touched upon it a little bit, and I kind of want to double click into it, because one of the key aspects of having control tower and having just centralized network architecture is you could start to control and govern a lot of different aspects while monitoring for those different pieces. So if you think about, hey, if you have a hub and spoke networking design philosophy, right, it kind of replaces some of the complexity that comes with, okay, this is an individual over here, this is an individual over there, because now you can start to think about it in a different way of, I have all these accounts, all my security is set up a different way. I can monitor the ingress and egress of different things, right? I didn't have enough coffee. So when you start to think about that,
is there such a thing?
Yeah, right. So you can start to think about it in a certain way of, how do I continue on of monitoring? How can I continue on enforcing and governing in a way that, hey, maybe I can have something like a network firewall with my centralized egress, that I have network firewall rules, some of them managed within my different inspection VPCs, in order to provide the stateful inspection, in order to say, hey, help with intrusion prevention and help with web filtering and so on and so forth. It's all these capabilities that you can have with deployments within the LZA and your control tower, right? There's a lot of different aspects to the networking piece that comes into in your head because the possibilities start to grow. But the step back that we always like to take, and you were waiting for it, but I didn't do it that time. The step back you want to take is understanding exactly what your compliance standards are, right? What you're trying to achieve within your security isolation, how you're monitoring traffic, and how you're producing that. Because one of the key aspects of having something like LZA and Control Tower and a centralized logging archiving account is the power of seeing everything, controlling everything within your org, and making sure that other people can't control everything in your org, right? Because one of the key aspects that I like to say is service control policies. It's not the first line of defense, I would say. I would argue it's the last line of defense, right? Reason why I say that is usually when you're thinking of, okay, how can I block this? It's like, oh, just put a service control policy in. No, we shouldn't think about it to that level. I think of it from the other way of that's just one of the last mechanisms is, does the person already have the authority to do this from an identity standpoint before it even gets to SCP, right? Can they assume into this role? Can they go here? Can they see into security hub findings? Can they do whatever the case may be? And then service control policy. That's just kind of my thoughts of it, because you start to think of it a different way, opposed to just a direct cut. You have all these defense in depth approaches built in. I don't know. What is your thoughts on that, Russ?
Yeah, definitely. I really enjoy defense in depth. The earlier you're able to, detect something, the better it'll be. So I think that's a good way of putting, like, thinking about it, and how we would go about, just overall, like the, man, words are not wordsing today for me at all.
Coffee level went low.
Yes.
But we'll pick it back up. I think part of it is exactly where you're going is the defensive depth is understanding exactly what, I would say not drains your health bar, but I think it's the next item is what keeps you up at night, right? What do you think about? And I think that's where that defensive depth, because you start to have like, okay, yeah, I have this and I have this. And feel free in the chat, 1, 2, 3, or 4, let us know what you're thinking about. But Russ, they want to know what you're thinking about first.
Okay, so for this one, when I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking about, about my AWS environment and then my customer's AWS environment. And they have two different answers. So mostly for me right now, I'm definitely focused on 4. Like, okay, how am I going to scale this? How am I going to make this work in a larger data set, a larger environment, or for, example, like all AWS customers? So for me, that's what keeps me up at night. Scalability. How do I do this, bigger, better? And so that would be my personal answer. But like what keeps me up at night about my customers' AWS environments is definitely going to be things like number 1. Is there small things that, you just left one box unchecked or, didn't click one thing and then all of a sudden, your S3 bucket is public and it has all the sensitive information on there. Again, this is kind of does lead back to the defense in depth thing. Hopefully it's caught before someone is like, ooh, this has information, or hopefully you have Macy where they're like, this is public, please don't do that. But so yeah, for me, it's that one. It's those little manual, mental errors, or just we've done the ClickOps so often that, we just forgot this specific one or this specific thing. That's definitely what keeps me up at night, and why I always, and why we, you as well, recommend to start automating things as much as possible and use IAC for this exact reason. So, yeah, I guess for me in IR, it's number 1.
Yeah, I would say it's number 1 for me as well, because it's a layered approach. It's complex. It's like an onion, right? There's so many layers to peel back on this, is because for a publicly available S3 bucket, 1, you had to get past the default settings now, because it's blocked by default. And then 2, you had to have the ability to do that. And 3, there was no service control policy or anything along those lines. So that would keep me up at night, right? Is knowing that if this happened, it failed at multiple steps, right? Like you were saying, it's just, okay, why? And that's kind of the feeling, right, that you get is, like, why was this public? What types of data classifications were in there, right? Those are the questions that start to spawn in your head, right? Mm-hmm. And I think as you delve in a little bit more, it's an important fact that you brought up from the aspect of knowing the services of, hey, what services do we actually leverage within our environment? I think that's an important just thought process, right? Because when you start to think about, hey, what services do we enable organization-wide? I think that's kind of a piece of the conversation. So what do you think of when you think of, right? 3 times. It comes
it's happening to all of us. It's a bug. Yeah. I gave it to you. It's contagious.
It's like a VHS tape when, they used to but dated myself, but also just saying which services should be enabled as you're starting along your LZA and control tower journey. What do you think, Russ?
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot, especially, not just for convenience, but for security. So I think of, the big security services. So automating security hub deployment seems like a good idea to me. That's security hub is where you're, aggregating all the alerts from guard duty, config, Macy, all of that. So that would probably be my number 1 step. But number 2 would be enabling those alerts. So guard duty, Macy, config.
Working backwards. I like it.
Yeah. But yes, because if you have guard duty enabled, but it's not going to security hub, then where is it going? So yes, please set up the actual alerting mechanism in security hub before you do that. And so things like guard duty config, not just for compliance monitoring, but configuration and the actual, because AWS config records the resource configuration. So having those is good for the tracking and monitoring. And then definitely Macy is the service. We had a whole episode about it last year, if you want to go back and refresh. But that is what the service that searches for critical information within your account and lets you know or alerts if there's some sort of critical information or something that you've designated as critical. It will alert you if it's improperly stored or if they discover anything, across the board. Yeah, exactly. And so that's another one that's important to have. And then, of course, because I can't, go very long without talking about logging, some sort of logging solution, preferably centralized, like, CloudTrail config, VPC flow logs, all of those things would be ideal to have, and CloudWatch, of course. But having some sort of centralized logging architecture allows you to have basically all API calls, configuration changes, VPC flow logs, so network traffic, metadata, all of those things would be sent to, an encrypted bucket, all in one place that allows you to kind of do those, those alerting and the detection rules and config rules and all of those things all in one, convenient place. But it's also convenient for attackers, which is why it's encrypted. And so things like that, and those are kind of the big services I think of. But there's also, the automated remediation workflows with Lambda or Event Bridge, which is also going to be super helpful for various things, not just IR. There's compliance validation or violation triggers. So security findings, compliance violations. There are certain things that you can set up, like Lambda functions that will automatically trigger and fix issues like disabling or enabling public S3 access, stuff like that. So there's a lot of different services that really would bring, the control tower and the landing zone, to that next level. So I think that's pretty much the big ones. So, Macy or Security Hub, Macy, logging, and networking.
Yeah, and I think out of those different pieces, the part that just struck me is kind of the logging aspect, right? Because part of the challenge that we see working with customers is we see them struggling to understand which logs should be included within just being enabled, right? Do I enable all the logs? Do I enable VPC full logs everywhere? Do I just enable it here in the egress and the ingress or whatever happens? And I think part of the conversation kind of has to shift to, hey, I'm enabling these different logs, but I'm also optimizing the way these logs are being kind of viewed. And what I mean by that is, let's say you generate all your logs, they get put into a S3 bucket. Okay, from there, where does it go? Does it go to Security Lake or another centralized type of lake solution itself, and then goes to a SIM? Does it go directly into your SIM from that S3 bucket, right? Do you have something like, I don't know, CrowdStrike, for example, that's integrated with it that you view all of your alerts from? Okay, now you're sending all those different pieces to CrowdStrike, and it just creates a lot of noise. So how are you optimizing your logs from your centralized logging architecture? I think that's some of the questions that customers are still trying to answer in their environments until they delve in a little bit more, right? And I think that's a big part of the puzzle, because that's kind of the big fight from, hey, what keeps me up at night? That's the fight I'm trying to understand is like, am I capturing everything, right? That's what we hear a lot. Am I capturing enough for my needs? And then how do I balance that out versus cost? And that's kind of the music starts to kick up in your head, right? And it keeps you up.
Music.
Yeah, you start to figure it out, and you start to energize, right? The same way that you get energized thinking about all the different items that you have to kind of know on a daily basis. So there's different things you can do. You can take, some certifications, right, and gain that cert knowledge. Or, since it's the Safe Room Feature Security Side Quest, you could go on something of a knowledge quest. And what is a knowledge quest? Well, sit down and I'll let you know what it is. It's that. Sit down and wait a second. I was trying to remember that old saying, right? But I'm not that old yet. So coming down and trying to think about it, you start to think about, hey, how do I develop myself and my organization and my security strategy in a way that I not only empower my entire organization, but I also build a little bit of aura while doing that, right? You just have known as that you're known as that security person that knows a lot about everything, right? Mm-hmm. And how do you do that? Well, you delve into the different pieces of information out there. And also, you have to understand that you just don't start out being a hero. You have to kind of work yourself up, right? You're starting here, right? There's a little asterisk next to it, right? You're L100. So as an L100, where do you go? Where do you have to kind of dive deep into to kind of figure out your own path? Well, kind of like we said before, you don't have to figure it out yourself. You can kind of go down and use some of the current knowledge and information that's out there. like the well-architected framework, right? It's just digging in and saying, hey, what is this? What is the security foundations? What is the shared responsibility model? What is the verbiage I should be using when I'm communicating to different stakeholders? That's kind of where you start out from an L100 standpoint, is understanding, hey, what are the best practices when it comes to managing your AWS environment? How do I apply security at all the layers? How do I protect data in transit, at rest, and everything in between that? Right? And how do I, most importantly, keep people away from the, hold on, I have to zoom in on this a little bit more. How do I keep people away from data? Right? It's one of those aspects that it may sound interesting, and it's like, why? Well, why not is one of the things that come to my mind, but also it's because if we're speaking about all these pieces of automation and we have control tower, we have LZA, we have all these different mechanisms monitoring, everybody doesn't need to see everything, right? So with that concept in mind, what are the different guardrails that you could put into place so that they only see the pieces that they need to see? Not everybody needs to have admin access. Not everybody needs to have power user access. They just need to know what is for their role. And also, I am Access Analyzer. Just a quick little plug for that, just because it's so great. And we were speaking
100.
Yeah. And as you start to figure out these different pieces, you start to figure out, hey, how do I support cloud foundations within my environment? And you start to see the little, level up sign over your head, and you become a veteran adventurer because you're digging and diving deep into these different areas and questioning, hey, what do I need to know? Especially from an architectural standpoint. Because if you have something like the Landing Zone Accelerator, hey, you have some pre-built items that you can dive into, right? Because when you start to think about the LZA design, you start to think of, okay, now I have code pipeline. I have the different versions. I have my S3 bucket. I have all these different mechanisms in there. Now I can start to kind of level up myself a little bit. And then as you level up yourself, eventually you become a legend because you're starting to solve and understand different pieces of the environment. You're starting to know how to, go through and deploy things. You start to understand, now I can go directly to the GitHub page and just kind of figure out, hey, now I can start to implement these different pieces of the puzzle of, hey, how do I kind of go through and understand all these different repositories? And eventually you start to get to the part where you can take that step back, as we talk about, because you're already a legend. But you can also level up, as I mentioned, yourself and your environment and your security posture and have fun while doing it. But Russ, before you do all of that, what do you have to do?
I would say that you'd probably want to think ahead and have a incident response plan created.
Yes, I think that is the word of the day and the word of the year is incident response plan, right?
The word of my day every day. So, yeah. Yes.
And I think with that being said, that's a good place to leave off on. So, as always, thank you for all who joined us on our journey, and join us not next week because of the holiday, but the following week as we continue our journeys to the security realm and maybe World 1-3, or maybe we'll skip and play the flute and go straight to 8. So who knows? Well, maybe we do, but join us next time to figure it out. Thank you, and happy Monday, everyone.